The woman who called herself Madame Zalera told every customer the same terrifying truth. Death was coming for them within days, and only by following her exact instructions could they avoid their gruesome fate. Frontier towns banned her from their carnivals. Newspapers called her a fraud, and desperate people paid fortunes to hear predictions they prayed would be wrong. But when a massive disaster struck Colorado territory, everyone she had warned was mysteriously safe. Madame Zalera had arrived on the American frontier in the spring of 1878, traveling with Morrison's Continental Carnival as it made its circuit through mining towns and settlements across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana territories. At first glance, she appeared to be exactly what frontier communities expected from a traveling fortune teller. An exotic woman of indeterminate age with dark hair, mysterious jewelry, and clothing that suggested origins in distant, mystical lands. Her tent was decorated with crystal balls, tarot cards, and elaborate tapestries that created an atmosphere of otherworldly wisdom and supernatural knowledge. But from her very first day of operation, Madame Zalera's fortune-telling business was unlike anything the American West had ever encountered. While other carnival fortune tellers specialized in providing customers with comforting predictions about future love, prosperity, and happiness, Zalera offered only warnings of impending doom. She would peer into her crystal ball with theatrical intensity, gasp in apparent horror at what she saw, and then deliver detailed prophecies of specific disasters that would befall her customers within days or weeks. Her typical reading would begin with an ominous pronouncement. The spirits speak of great danger surrounding you. She would then describe elaborate scenarios of potential death, fires that would consume homes, accidents that would claim lives, illnesses that would strike without warning, or violence that would come from unexpected sources. But most importantly, she would provide precise instructions for avoiding these predicted catastrophes, specific places to avoid, particular days to remain indoors, exact routes to take when traveling, or people to stay away from during certain time periods. The frontier communities that encountered Zalera's carnival performances were initially fascinated by her dramatic style and specific predictions. Unlike the vague, encouraging platitudes offered by most fortune tellers, Zalera's prophecies were detailed, immediate, and terrifying. She would tell customers not just that danger was coming, but exactly what form it would take when it would arrive and what they needed to do to survive it. However, the novelty of Zalera's approach quickly wore off as word spread about the disturbing nature of her predictions. Parents complained that she was frightening their children with talk of imminent death. Business owners worried that her prophecies of disasters would damage their community's reputations and economic prospects. Religious leaders condemned her as either a fraud who was exploiting people's fears or a practitioner of dark arts who was attracting evil influences to their towns. The backlash against Zalera became so intense that several towns banned Morrison's Continental Carnival entirely rather than allow her fortune-telling tent to operate within their boundaries. Newspaper editorials throughout the territory condemned her as a charlatan who preyed on the superstitions and anxieties of frontier residents. Local officials pressured carnival management to remove her from their lineup of attractions. But carnival owner Jake Morrison refused to dismiss Zalera, not out of loyalty or artistic integrity, but because her tent was consistently one of the most profitable attractions in his entire operation. Despite the public condemnation and official disapproval, people continued to seek out her services in remarkable numbers. The more terrifying her predictions became, the more desperate customers were willing to pay for her guidance. What the public didn't realize was that Morrison himself had become one of Zalera's most devoted believers after she had warned him about a supposedly accidental fire that was planned to destroy his carnival. Following her instructions to move his operation to a different location had saved him from a disaster that would have killed dozens of people and destroyed his livelihood. Morrison's faith in Zalera's abilities was absolute, and he protected her from community pressure because he had seen firsthand that her warnings could prevent catastrophic losses. The true nature of Zalera's activities began to emerge in the summer of 1879, when a pattern became apparent to those who were paying close attention to her work. People who followed her detailed instructions for avoiding predicted disasters were not only surviving the specific threats she had warned them about, they were also avoiding dangers that hadn't been publicly known or anticipated. A merchant who followed Zalera's advice to avoid a particular mountain pass escaped a landslide that killed 12 other travelers. A family that heeded her warning to leave their home for 3 days returned to find that their house had been the target of an arson attack that would have killed them all. A mining foreman who followed her instructions to inspect a specific tunnel discovered structural problems that would have caused a collapse, killing dozens of workers. The accuracy of Zalera's predictions was so consistent and specific that it began to attract the attention of territorial law enforcement officials who wondered whether she might have information about planned criminal activities. Federal Marshal David Kane, who had been investigating a series of suspicious incidents throughout Colorado Territory, decided to visit Zalera's tent to determine whether her supposed supernatural abilities might actually be based on inside knowledge of criminal conspiracies. Kane's investigation of Zalera revealed information that completely transformed his understanding of both her activities and the broader criminal situation in Colorado Territory. Rather than being a fraud or a supernatural phenomenon, Zalera was actually Elena Volkov, a former intelligence operative who had worked for the Russian government before immigrating to America following political upheavals in Europe. Elena's background included training in cryptography, surveillance techniques, and intelligence analysis that made her uniquely qualified to detect and interpret the signs of planned criminal activities. Her work as a traveling fortune teller provided perfect cover for an intelligence-gathering operation that allowed her to move freely throughout the frontier territories while collecting information about criminal conspiracies and planned attacks. Elena's methods for gathering intelligence were sophisticated and systematic. Her dramatic fortune-telling performances served as a front for careful questioning of customers about their backgrounds, activities, and concerns. Her reputation for predicting specific disasters encouraged people to share detailed information about threats they had heard about or unusual activities they had observed. Her position as a carnival attraction allowed her to visit communities throughout the territory and establish contact with sources of information in multiple locations. Most importantly, Elena had developed a network of informants and contacts throughout the frontier territories who provided her with advance warning about planned criminal activities. Her supernatural predictions were actually based on detailed intelligence reports about planned raids, arson attacks, mining accidents caused by sabotage, and other disasters that were being organized by criminal groups or corrupt officials. Elena's transformation into Madame Zalera had been a carefully calculated decision based on her assessment of how she could most effectively use her intelligence skills to protect innocent people in frontier communities. She had recognized that direct warnings about criminal activities would be dismissed or ignored by territorial authorities who were often corrupt or incompetent. But warnings disguised as supernatural predictions will be taken seriously by individuals who are motivated to protect themselves and their families. The specific instructions that Elena provided to her customers were based on detailed intelligence about how criminal attacks were planned and executed. Her advice about avoiding certain locations was based on knowledge of where attacks were scheduled to occur. Her recommendations about remaining indoors on specific dates reflected intelligence about when raids or other violent incidents were planned. Her suggestions about alternative travel routes were designed to steer people away from areas where they would be vulnerable to criminals or corrupt officials. Elena's network of informants included former military personnel who had become disillusioned with frontier corruption railroad workers who observed suspicious activities along transportation routes, mining company employees who witnessed sabotage and dangerous working conditions, and saloon keepers who overheard conversations about planned criminal activities. These sources provided Elena with intelligence that was far more detailed and accurate than anything available to official law enforcement agencies. The disaster that would ultimately vindicate Elena's methods and reveal the true scope of her protective activities occurred in September 1880, when a massive explosion destroyed the Silver Peak Mining Company's primary facility near Denver. The explosion killed over 200 people and caused millions of dollars in property damage, making it one of the deadliest industrial disasters in American history. But among the hundreds of families who should have been affected by the Silver Peak disaster, an unusual pattern emerged. People who had consulted Madame Zalera during the previous months had been warned to avoid the mining area during the exact time period when the explosion occurred, following her advice to seek employment elsewhere, visit relatives in distant communities, or delay business trips had saved their lives. The investigation that followed the Silver Peak disaster revealed that the explosion had not been an accident, but the result of a complex conspiracy involving corrupt mining officials, federal agents, and criminal organizations who were attempting to cover up evidence of illegal activities. The conspiracy had been planned for months and involved multiple criminal groups who had coordinated their activities to maximize the destruction and eliminate witnesses to their other crimes. Elena's intelligence network had detected the Silver Peak conspiracy weeks in advance of the explosion, allowing her to warn potential victims through her fortune-telling performances. Her detailed knowledge of the criminal plot had enabled her to provide specific guidance about which areas to avoid and when the danger would be greatest, saving hundreds of lives that would otherwise have been lost. The revelation of Elena's true identity and activities created a sensation throughout the territory and led to a fundamental reevaluation of her role in frontier law enforcement. Federal authorities realized that her intelligence-gathering capabilities exceeded those of official agencies, and that her network of informants had been more effective than traditional law enforcement methods in detecting and preventing criminal activities. Elena's techniques for disguising intelligence work as supernatural prediction became a model for other covert operations throughout the American frontier. Her ability to gather information while maintaining an effective cover identity demonstrated the potential for unconventional approaches to law enforcement in regions where traditional methods were inadequate or compromised by corruption. More importantly, Elena's story illustrated the complex relationship between perception and reality in frontier communities. Her reputation for predicting disasters had made her feared and condemned by people who didn't understand that her dark prophecies were actually efforts to protect them from real dangers. The supernatural explanations that people created for her accurate predictions had obscured the fact that she was conducting sophisticated intelligence work that served essential protective functions. The families whose lives Elena had saved through her warnings became powerful advocates for recognizing her contributions to frontier safety and security. Parents whose children had survived disasters because they had followed Madame Zalera's advice publicly credited her with preventing tragedies that would have destroyed their families. Business owners whose enterprises had been protected by her warnings acknowledged that her supposedly harmful predictions had actually been essential protective services. Elena's network of informants and intelligence sources continued to operate under official government supervision after her true identity was revealed. The system she had developed for collecting and analyzing information about criminal activities became a foundation for more effective law enforcement throughout the territory, leading to the prevention of numerous additional disasters and criminal attacks. The fortune-telling cover that Elena had used proved to be so effective that other intelligence operatives adopted similar approaches for their own covert operations. The combination of theatrical performance, psychological insight, and systematic information gathering that characterized her work became a model for intelligence collection in communities where conventional law enforcement was ineffective or compromised. Elena's personal transformation from intelligence operative to protective fortune teller reflected her deep commitment to serving the people of frontier communities rather than the political interests that had originally motivated her career. Her willingness to sacrifice her reputation and social standing in order to provide warnings that could save lives demonstrated a form of moral courage that transcended the conventional boundaries between law enforcement and public service. The techniques that Elena developed for encoding intelligence information as supernatural predictions also proved to have broader applications for secure communication in dangerous environments. Her methods for conveying specific instructions through seemingly mystical pronouncements became models for resistance communications that were used in various contexts throughout American history. Perhaps most significantly, Elena's story challenged conventional assumptions about the relationship between rational analysis and supernatural belief in frontier communities. Her success in protecting people through fortune-telling demonstrated that effective protective services could be delivered through cultural forms that people were prepared to accept and act upon, even when they might reject the same information if it were presented through official channels. The memorial established in Elena's honor after her death included testimonials from hundreds of people whose lives have been saved by her warnings. These testimonials revealed the extraordinary scope of her protective activities and the precision with which she had been able to identify and prevent specific threats to individual families and entire communities. Elena's intelligence files, which are preserved by federal authorities, provided unprecedented insight into the criminal organizations and corrupt networks that had threatened frontier communities during the 1870s and 1880s. Her detailed documentation of criminal conspiracies became essential evidence for prosecutions that continued for years after her death, leading to convictions that dismantled criminal networks throughout the region. The Carnival fortune teller who had been condemned as a purveyor of doom had actually been conducting one of the most successful protective intelligence operations in American frontier history. Her dark predictions had been life-saving warnings, and her supposed supernatural powers had been sophisticated analytical skills applied to the protection of innocent people who had no other source of security or guidance. Elena Volkov's transformation into Madame Zalera demonstrated that true service to community safety sometimes requires individuals to accept misunderstanding and condemnation in order to provide protection that cannot be delivered through conventional means. Her story proved that the most important victories are often achieved by people who are willing to be feared and hated in order to save lives that would otherwise be lost to preventable disasters. If you're enjoying these incredible true stories of hidden heroism and covert protection, hit that subscribe button because we've got many more tales of individuals who sacrifice their reputations to save lives waiting for you. Click on the video on your screen to hear another story about someone who discovered that sometimes the most effective way to help people is to tell them exactly what they don't want to hear, proving that true prophecy isn't about predicting the future, it's about changing it.